Right then, back with episode 15 now of the Midnight Pod, and I think our oldest guest so far on the pod, we have Nick Atherton on. And how do I know Nick? Well, I'm sure we'll dive into that, but basically Nick works in M&A, so mergers and acquisitions. I found with one of the pods I put out a few weeks ago at this point, which was like not relevant at all to like e-com, business, digital marketing, didn't get as good a reception as previous ones. And I was like, fuck, okay, people are actually interested in like e-com, building businesses to sell, etc., etc. I thought Nick would be a good guest because we go back about 6 years or so, maybe even 7 at this point. But also, yeah, like M&A, super interesting space. It's actually how I like first got exposed to like business and shit, I suppose, like 7 years ago on that placement when I was wearing a suit and pretending I knew things. Not e-com specific, but involved in a bunch of different things. And yeah, I just think it'd be an interesting episode for our listeners who are used to kind of more e-com side of things, but I think you bring like a more mature and experienced perspective to things. It'd just be good to chat about what you do basically and a bunch of other shit. So I guess first question, like usual, and Tokyo's going mad, is just really, I guess, give us a rundown of kind of your background and what you do and what you do currently, and then dive into a load of shit.
Yeah, so today my main role is I run a corporate finance business, which sounds really boring, but actually there's a lot of fun to it. So essentially most of my day is spent trying to sell people's businesses, and the sectors vary from really tedious stuff like cleaning businesses or security businesses to actually quite cool stuff like tech businesses or software businesses, which recently we've gone into like much better sectors where the multiples are a lot higher, which is good for me, but also you enjoy it a lot more, I think, when you like the sector. So I cut my teeth on things like surveying businesses, architectural practices, engineering is now a big sector as well, but you actually get to see some quite cool stuff when you go around their amazing factories and see them making huge sea jacks that they're going to put out at sea to build like wind farms and all that stuff. So it isn't all, I mean, of course there is a lot of stuff that's pretty tedious. It's like, you're dealing with lawyers and accountants a lot, which, I know that you don't particularly enjoy. You're essentially like you are just the middleman all the time. So I think obviously I built it from scratch. I started when I was 25. I'm now 38. It was really tough the first few years. I mean, I regretted it, I think, pretty hard those years. I had to move home, live with my mum because it was going so badly. I mean, I didn't do my first deal until the 4th year of owning Morphose. So it was a real tough slog to get it off the ground. I mean, the kind of the lead time for an M&A deal can be easily 2 years. So, when you start these things up, you're so naive. You think you can do one in 6 months. You think everyone's going to use you. But in the client base we've got now is fantastic. There's loads of, you have a great contact base and you have a great reputation. So actually we're more choosy about who we take on to sell. We don't just sell anyone, Mainly we're interviewing them actually when we go to a pitch. It's not them interviewing us because you've got to work with these people on a real intense basis. Sometimes, as I say, for 2 years. And it's the biggest thing they've ever done in their lives, selling their business. It's more important than, anything else they've ever done.
Get married.
Well, I mean, maybe kids is more important, but, these are huge decisions. It's usually an older man, it's some bloke in his 50s that's about to make 5, 10, 15, 20 million quid. I mean, these are crucial moments of their lives, and you're basically holding their hand for 2 years, going through a pretty emotional process a lot of the time. As you get close to the line on something and then it flops. People get very stressed and very upset. So, I mean, it's been a good journey. I still feel like we're just getting going, to be honest. We're still growing. We're still getting asked to pitch on bigger and bigger things, better sectors all the time. So I'm quite excited about the future. I mean, I don't want to do M&A forever, but it's, it pays the bills and it's quite good most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so Morphose, don't know if I mentioned that in the intro, that's the name of the I guess, you call yourself a boutique firm?
Yeah, we're a boutique. There's about 12 of us if you count the non-execs. Most people are self-employed, which is a much better model in M&A because you really are on peaks and troughs all the time. Sometimes we can be super busy, sometimes we're not that busy. So, you know, a lot of the people who work for me also do other things, but that's good. Some of the people who work with us are also clients. So of my 4 non-exec directors, we do deals for 3 of them. And they're all cool guys. They've all made a lot of money, so they're very good mentors for me. And they're great for the other staff in the office.
Yeah. Going back prior to that thing, so I don't know if you told me about like 4 years and shit previously. I always probably thought you were just doing well, but
no.
What did you do? And I'm asking like the cliche questions. I think it'd be useful for people watching. Like,
yeah, sure.
How did you get into that from like uni and stuff?
Yeah, so I did the only thing I liked at school, which was economics. I did it at uni. My parents made me go to uni. I didn't probably want to really, but you know, I said to my old man last night, I just thought it was a complete waste of time actually looking back, but I should have just gone and got a job. It would have been much better for me. I just spent 3 years smoking weed and drinking booze and all the other things, right? So looking back, if I'd just gone straight into the bank that I'd done an internship at before I went to uni, I think that would have been a better training ground for me.
Yeah,
I went back to the bank after uni and it was really good. Only because I realised... I realised it was Merrill Lynch, but I realised I really didn't want to be a banker. Like I hated it, but it was really good that I found that out at an early age. You know, I didn't really want to work for a big corporate, and you know, the chairman of Morpheus is obviously your uncle Ollie.
Everyone's going to be writing in the comments that I'm some fucking silver spoon cunt now, which I'll just say I've never been given any money from him or anyone else in my business. Although I'm currently trying to raid a seed round.
That's how we obviously know each other. He was the one who steered me in the direction of working for a small company, because I just learned so much more working in a 4-man company. I worked there for 2 years. It went bust in 2008 in the recession. I learned so much about going, you know, the business going into administration, him not being able to pay anyone.
Yeah. I know about that as well now.
Owing loads of money to the bank. I mean, I learned how to not run a business. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons for me, was realising actually we didn't need a big swanky office to make money. We didn't need to employ loads of people to make money. You know, that flexible model that I learned how to operate, I think has really saved Morpheus, because there's been times since, you know, in the last 7-8 years where we've had really bad years. You know, Brexit was a terrible year for us because no one makes any decisions for 12 months or 24 months. You know, COVID was okay for us, but not great. Very hard to generate new deals in COVID because you can't go out and see anyone. Yeah. People don't tend to sell their companies via Zoom meetings. You know, they want to see you, make sure you're not going to mess it up. So yeah, economics at university, it was an okay training ground. I guess it gave me some skills that I use today. Not many, I don't think. Yeah. The accountancy was quite useful. And accountancy is so dull, but you need it. You need to understand it. Yeah. If you don't, you suffer.
Yeah, very true. And then how did you choose which businesses? Obviously you said like some like non-glamorous ones. My experience of it was like FM, facilities management businesses, which is like cleaning and shit. Was that by chance, or was that like, I'm passionate about fucking sprinklers, I want to help people sell businesses?
So your uncle Oliver is very well known in the facilities management sector.
I probably didn't know how to shit.
He is one of the kings of facilities management originally. So he founded one of the very first facilities management businesses. He sold it to Carillion, who obviously you probably know the name. Yeah. You know, then he sold another one to EC Harris, which is a big property operator. So he's well known in that space. That was just where the contacts were. You know, so, you know, we tapped up every facilities management that he knew, every facilities management company we knew. And yeah, they aren't the sexy sectors. It is dull as dishwater. It's the people who maintain the lift, the aircon unit, the boiler, the people who clean the floors, the people who clean the windows. You know, in a big building like this, we're on the 15th floor, they're doing the people who come up and down, the abseilers that are doing. There's good money in this stuff.
All the shit that happens that you don't really think about.
Exactly. Fire extinguishers. One of your first experiences at Morpheus.
Get onto that.
Was, we can talk about that. But, you know, one of my big sales that I did 5 years ago was a fire extinguisher business. You know,
CFS,
they sell almost every single fire extinguisher in the UK to Tesco, Sainsbury's, all these people, they're buying tens of thousands of these things off you. They're getting it in from China and selling it for £1 more than they bought it for. I mean, you know, which is not too dissimilar to some e-commerce models, is it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, facilities management, that led to also the property sector, architectural firms, surveying practices, things like that. Again, it's kind of very steady stuff. You know, it's very male-dominated industries. You know, people, old boys that have been doing it for 50 years, right?
Yeah.
And they kind of build towards a sale. Usually it's kind of a medium kind of exit, but they've usually done quite well out of the business over the years. You know, and they want out when they're 60, right? Well, they're usually because they want to go and do something else because they're so bored of it.
Yeah. So what would a typical deal size be then? Because I feel like the reason that's an interesting question is the problem with that e-com and digital marketing and like this online stuff, and particularly because of social media, is that everyone thinks that every business either doesn't exist or sells for £1 billion. Do you know what I mean? It's like this culture of, oh, I'm going to sell a business for £1 billion because they read about these tech unicorns.
Sure.
But when I first got exposed to all that, it kind of showed me there's like this, I guess, mid-market, more normal, more attainable, I suppose, in inverted commas, that can still set people up for life. But like,
yeah, of course.
Like,
I mean,
what sort of deal size?
When we started off, you know, if we made someone £1 million, that was a good result. But, you know, there's two things to that, is that it doesn't mean that they're dead. They've got the $1 million, they can reinvest it, you know, they can get a yield on that. They might go and start another business and go again in something that they prefer. They might buy 10 flats and, you know, you just don't, you know, it doesn't mean it's the end. But I mean, look, in my opinion, if you make kind of 5, 6, 7 million out of a deal, you know, you never have to work again in that situation if you invest it.
Yeah.
You know, you can easily give it to a fund manager that will make you 6%, 7% a year after tax, right? So life's pretty good. You know, usually at that stage as well, these people don't have mortgages. They probably have 2 or 3 houses and they probably have other things, you know, going on. So in my experience, you know, the people who are making 50 or 100, it's very, very rare. It doesn't mean that their lives are so much better. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean they're happier either, from what I can see, you know, which is another point. A lot of people drive themselves into the ground to make so much money that they don't need, you know. So a lot of the time when I sit down with someone who's selling, I'm saying, look, actually, you know, they sit down and tell you an unrealistic figure that they're like aspiring to get. But my advice would be, look, take what you know, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way last year.
Yeah, and that's the big lesson of this, is that if you could bank 10, you know, it doesn't mean that your career's over. It doesn't mean you're retiring, does it? You know, you can go again and do something different. You know, you're de-risking everything in your life, aren't you?
Yeah.
You know, for every guy that's gone out and made a Snapchat, a Twitter, a Gymshark, you know, there's how many have failed? Hundreds of thousands have failed, right? You know, so are those people 1,000 times happier than the bloke who's made 5 or 10 out of something? I don't think they are. You know, I think having that much money is not always a good thing, right? You become a target in all sorts of ways.
Yeah,
your family become a target. You know, I think being anonymously rich is a much better life than being a famous billionaire.
Yeah, to be fair, I often discuss this with mates, and it's like, yeah, firstly that, I think being like anonymous to an extent, maybe not anonymous, but certainly not famous. But then also, yeah, it's like often you put so much pressure on it. Well, I certainly do, and have in the past probably more, like, oh, I need to make 100 million quid, blah blah blah. And I joke about it because people have been on this podcast and that watch it that will say, I want to build a business and sell it for 100 million quid, but they've not made 50 grand yet. And they're still talking about making 100 million quid from a business. Whereas actually, like you just said, 3 to 5 million quid and you're set for life. Like actually, absolutely. If you invest that, maybe even 2. If you if you live fairly simply.
Well, but you know, you can leverage against those investments to do other things. I mean, you know, these days there are lots of clever banking products out there where you give an investor X million. It doesn't mean they'll lend you half that back at a very cheap rate, like a mortgage.
Yeah.
They'll treat it like a house. You can take equity out of these things, and set up another business, or, you know, there's all sorts of other options.
Yeah.
You know, if you're making that kind of money, a couple of million quid, you know, you're already in the very top 1% in this country, I'd say. Well,
0.01%.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's not so bad, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just funny because people lose perspective, I think, because of social media. And it's always people that have never done anything that are like,
I think
well,
they
not
do.
done anything, but like people that are, and myself included, a bit more in the past, probably to an extent now. I was like, oh, I want to make £1 billion or whatever.
Yeah.
When they haven't made 5 million yet, including myself.
That's, you know, if I, on my LinkedIn, I don't follow any of those Zuckerberg, Gatesy, Bezos kind of people. I just think that's a different universe, you know, that kind of stuff. And, you know, I don't also want to be those people. I don't think it's that fun, you know. Actually, do you watch Succession on Sky?
No, I'm not seeing it.
Succession's I'm sure a lot of your viewers watch it, but it's about them, basically based on the Murdoch family, you know, and they are the most miserable bunch of backstabbing rich wankers you can ever
There's
imagine.
a bloke that owns a son in it, and he owns Sky and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, the misery that it causes, that much money, is, you know, you wouldn't wish that on anyone.
How much are they worth? Like billions?
Oh, yeah.
10 billion?
Tens of billions. There's private jets everywhere, all the time. Massively unhappy, divorced, in and out of rehab, drug addicts. It's just...
Yeah. Yeah, fuck that.
No love at all. You know, zero compassion from your parents. It's not a good place to be, I don't think. I mean, I don't imagine being Elon Musk's kid is a good life.
Yeah, true.
I mean, you might think it is.
His kid's called like XYZ or something.
Well,
some weird
you
shit,
know, can you imagine your first day at school and you're called XYAZ, whatever?
yeah, just because your dad's like a freak.
You're never going to have any proper friends. You know, you'll never be able to just walk into the pub and watch the football anonymously, right? Your whole life is then some sort of Kardashian soap opera, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, very true. And most of these businesses then, because obviously, yeah, maybe as one to get you on, because you've got a lot of experience, more than most, I guess, to be fair, but particularly in acquisitions and like meeting a lot of successful, rich, whatever people. And all these businesses, are they typically, like, are they profitable businesses? Because obviously, like, often in e-com and like digital online stuff, people are trying to sell businesses, like reading about businesses that, you know, sell for 10x revenue and they're burning money, like tech usually.
Yeah, so the vast majority of the businesses we sell are profitable businesses that you know, the profit steadily increases over time, and people buy them for a multiple of the profit plus the cash they have in the bank, you know, or less the debt that they have, you know.
Yeah.
Some of them have obviously got debt, but, you know, that's a tip, and you can pretty much work out the range. It's all to do with whether they're, you know, if they've got one big customer, that always makes them worth a lot less. So that's why an e-commerce business is generally good, because there's so many customers. You're not reliant on one person. Yeah. But a lot of these, you know, facilities businesses or property businesses, or, you know, those kind of sectors can be very reliant on contractual cycles, which is not good. So you might have to renew that contract every 3 years, and it might be a third of your revenue. And you know, it might be half your profit, and you might lose it to a competitor because they go in slightly cheaper. Then your business is worth half of what it was. So a lot of these exits are around, you've got to plan, you've got to really plan. So when you've just signed your big client up for another 3-year deal, that's when you want to sell. You want to sell 3 months after that. You don't want to sell a month. You don't want to sell a month before the tender's in, you know, because people will discount the value massively. So my job is always to structure the deal to protect the seller as much as possible, to make sure that, you know, he gets most of his money, or she gets most of their money in at the beginning of the deal. You know, you don't want to be waiting 3 years for half your money, because once you lose control of the company as well, you know, who's to say that this new person's not going to completely ruin it?
Yeah.
You know, and if they're incentivized not to pay you as well, that deferred element, why would they run it well if they owe you half the money?
True.
So, you know, our job is about protecting the seller as best we can, working very closely with the lawyers to draft very tight agreements, you know, around that stuff, and being ready to sue if you don't get the money. You know, so that's what they're paying for. with someone like us is, we've been through it 50 or 100 times, right?
Yeah.
And there are guys on my board that have sold businesses, that are in the hundreds of millions. Now, I haven't, but there are guys that have sold, things for 80 or 100 or 200 million. So we've got the breadth of experience. And of course, I'll get there at some point. When I'm a 60-year-old man, of course, that'll be the case. But my game is, it's a bit like an estate agent. When you start out, you sell the little flat in the crap end of town. You don't work for Savills on the first day. Well, you do if you're some sort of posh kid's parents.
You're into Eton,
yeah, but you don't sell the Richmond Green house or the Hampstead Heath house in your first month. It takes years to get that kind of trust and those contacts, doesn't it? To be the partner at Knight Frank. You don't see people in their 30s doing that. You see them in their 50s doing that.
Yeah, I follow some guy actually on Instagram who sells those super prime houses. I actually messaged him to come on the podcast, and very surprisingly he replied, but kind of unsurprisingly he said, well, I would, but this is not worth my time because you don't have a property audience. But yeah, I was thinking that because it just looks like a sick job, but I guess he's probably been in the game like 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. There was another alternative for me. So when I set up Morphose, I also did a surveying master's at Reading, and it was part-time. It was so boring. It was absolutely the most boring thing I've ever done. One of my friends taught me into doing it, but I did it in case Morphose went bust. I could always go and work for Savills or Knight Frank or do you know what I mean? Be a surveyor and just sell houses and buildings. And look, one of my best mates sells buildings. Similar job to me. He brokers big office buildings instead of companies, and he's doing really well. He worked for someone for 7-8 years, set up himself. He literally sits at home, out of his bedroom, 2 kids, and he's coining it now, selling big buildings. As the middleman. Is it the most exciting job in the world? I don't think it is, but
yeah. To be fair though, I think nothing is that exciting all the time, is it?
No,
even like e-commerce, like people think e-commerce is glamorous or whatever, but it's like fucking looking at a screen 90% of the day.
For me, I mean, I don't know it anywhere near as well.
Massive scale.
Yeah, I don't know it anywhere near as well as you or your audience probably, but it seems like doing lots of very simple things very, very well a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
You're doing so many little micromanaging things all the time, aren't you? And just constantly on the spreadsheets. And
yeah, I suppose the difference from like e-com is it's very fast moving. Like, you change some this afternoon on your ads, you should see the financial difference tomorrow. Whereas what you do, like you're saying, like fucking potentially a 2-year deal timeline.
I can meet people and they may not use us for 5 years. I can meet someone, at one of my networking events, and he might only be in his late 40s, or she might, I have to stop saying he, but it usually is a he, or she might be like, look, I'm only, 42, I'll sell when I'm 50, but keep in touch, or, so there's long lead times, and you've got to keep in touch with them at least once a year, I'd say. Otherwise, they will use someone else if, someone else comes along.
Yeah.
So.
And then there's a lot of things I want to come on to, but like typical multiples, because again, in e-com, there's massive debates around this, but I think probably because it's a newer industry. Like, is there like a typical range in terms of like EBITDA multiples, and what affects that?
Yeah, so a small business that's kind of reliant on one customer, you probably say is worth 2 or 3 times its pre-tax profit. We use the term EBITDA, which I don't know.
Earnings before interest, tax, depreciation.
Yeah, your earnings. Yeah, exactly. Your EBITDA, but a simple way to say is your pre-tax profit.
Yeah.
A kind of 2 or 3 times multiple for those things. That makes those businesses very hard to sell, because if you're the owner, you can imagine sitting there going, someone like me comes in and says, I'll give you 3 times for it. He's going to say, well, I may as well just run this bloody thing for 3 times. I'll just run it another 10 years. I'll get my kid in to run it, The more interesting ones, a 5 or a 6 times is when they've got really good customers. They're doing something a bit different, maybe that's, more statutory. So like when people have to have it, that's always a big thing.
What, like sprinklers?
You've got to have sprinklers. You've got to have a lift that works. You've got to have a boiler that works. You've got to have...
The lift never fucking works here. I think one's broken too.
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of compliance, statutory-led stuff is worth more. And then if you want to get 8, 10, 12 times, it's got to be sexy. It's got to be doing something really that people want. So probably some tech element to it, some software element to it to get that high. It's probably got to have it's going to be a larger business. Won't be relying on any one customer. It'll be high. The other term we use, which is very important, is recurring revenue. So this big insurance broking business I sold in February, it was the biggest deal we've ever done. He had a 97% recurring customer base. So every year, 97% of his customers just renew the insurance.
Yeah.
He's not the insurer, he's the middleman, he's the broker, but people love that, right? You know, you're not going to be able to ruin that very easily.
That's what I'm trying to do with this next bloody business, subscription.
Yeah, exactly, a subscription type model. That thing that people it goes out their bank account, they don't really care, you know. Yeah. And those things are worth a lot of money, you know. And that's why, if you can get a statutory compliance driven business with a lot of high recurring revenue, they're always worth a lot more than someone who's just reliant on one or two customers. Something project led businesses, people are like, oh, you know, I'm doing up this shop or I'm doing up this building, you know, they're businesses that people hate because the margins are very thin. It's, you know, Carillion, some of you might know the story, you know, it's one of the biggest building firms in the UK. It went bust, didn't it, last 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. I mean, they were just, you know, they went bust because they weren't pricing their contracts right, because it's such a competitive space. They're making 2% on a £400 million project. Yeah, only something small has to go wrong, right? Yeah. There's a few little fuck ups and, you know, your bum's out the window. Suddenly, you know, you're working for free, or actually you've paid for the privilege of building this hospital. Yeah. It's a disaster. And, you know, Carillion was a amusing story because a lot of boys at Morphose, a lot of the older boys have worked for Carillion or sold companies to Carillion over the years. So it was a bit of a shock when it went down. I mean, Robin, who you know, Robin Booker, is paid a pension by Carillion. Now, luckily, that was in a separate pot. You know, it's protected. But, you know, that was half of his annual income, that pension. So I think when it went down, he was pretty worried. You know, he's a 70-year-old guy kind of relying on that pension. Yeah. But yeah, multiples really vary. I mean, I've never sold one. I'm told by some of the people I work with in some of my other businesses I'm involved with that some of the software businesses that they bid for go for 20 times earnings, 20 times EBITDA. You know, I think that's usually pretty crazy. I mean, obviously, I'd love to own one that's sold for that sense, but I've never done one more than kind of 11 or 12 times.
Yeah, I was with a guy recently. I won't say his name or his business, but he told me, and it's, well, maybe I shouldn't say. Actually, I won't say, but he's coming on the podcast shortly. But he said he sold for a pretty healthy multiple, and that was an econ brand. But yeah, it was the higher end of what you're saying, but it was like 9 years old. Whereas a lot of econ brands, and myself included, like the brands I had last year were only like 2 years old, not even that. So it was like 9 years, had like wholesale as well as online. It was
so they're still selling on the profit though. They're not being sold on revenue.
Well, yeah, I guess he said it was on profit. Yeah. So it was. I'm sure it's pretty healthy looking at their previous numbers, but yeah, it's interesting because you obviously read about these, I guess, like unicorns. I mean, like Gymshark's an ecom example, obviously, but then you read about these fucking tech and ecom brands that sell for like 5x revenue and they're losing money, and it's like, I mean, at that point, I suppose the business or brand is viewed as an asset itself that is going to be worth more to the next bidder. So it kind of doesn't matter that it's losing money.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe there's cross-selling opportunities to that customer base. You know, if they can start selling them all the stuff that they sell elsewhere, then maybe it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It can be tax reasons. Sometimes these big American companies, they're making so much money that spending money on acquisition is actually tax efficient. You know,
take notes.
You know, they're kind of strategic buyers usually, and that's always what you want when you're selling your company. It's a strategic buyer, which means that it's a buyer that's going to pay more than anyone else because they're desperate to enter the market, either for something that they're not doing or somewhere that they aren't selling things. You know, so they're getting into the UK market. They're desperate, you know, or they're desperate to get into this watches thing or whatever it might be. They're not doing it. you know, they know that they can sell their bracelets to the people buying these watches, right? They know that they can double the revenue overnight. You know, they've got economies of scale, so they've got amazing deals with the advertisers already, you know, that they can just kind of, your thing, they can suck it up, take out a lot of the costs as well. So you'll have a lot of costs in your business that they just won't, you know, they already have.
Yeah.
They already have a finance department. They already have a marketing department. They already have kind of all that back office stuff that you then don't need anymore. So they're working out, they're doing their maths in a different way to us. I mean, that insurance,
exactly.
The insurance business we sold in February, you know, 11 or 12 times EBITDA, that buyer will sell for at least 20 times when they sell. They're an American insurance brokerage. They'll sell for 20 times at least. So they view that as cheap, buying something at 11 or 12.
Is that just a cultural thing, or just because the business was so strategic?
Because of the 97% recurring revenue. Literally, it's just like you're investing in something that's just like a money tree.
But why wouldn't they pay 20x for it if they're going to sell it in the future? 20x, I mean.
Oh, I see. Well, because they're a lot bigger.
Yeah.
So that, you know, he's a friend of mine now. He's a guy called John, but they've made his business 30% more profitable overnight. The day they bought it, the next day it's 13% more profitable. So they're already doing their maths in a way that we aren't, you know.
Yeah.
Their view of it is, well, we paid 12, but really we only paid 8 or 9 because we're already making 30% more. You know, happy days, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the strategic buyer is the one, if you can find one.
So following on from that then, I think a lot of people listening probably learning quite a lot, which is good. Yeah, moving away from e-com for once, which is interesting, but also being able to compare it. So in terms of like fees and shit then, so how does that all work as like a broker? Because certainly for me and a lot of people watching, they think of a broker, they probably think of property by default.
Yeah.
Is it similar to that? Is it different?
Yeah, it's quite similar. So the only difference is we don't work for free up front. So I won't work for someone unless they pay you something every month, or certainly a fee to get, you know, to do all the work in advance. So yeah. I'm happy if I've got a third of the overall fee in maybe beforehand. The other thing I have in the contract now, which, you know, this is after years of learning, is I have an abort fee. So that means that if we have an offer in that is along the lines of something that we've, you know, discussed that would be acceptable at the beginning, you know, if we've said, look, broadly speaking, we're aiming to make 10 million for you, and we've had offers in at kind of 8, 9, 10 million, and he decides or she decides to take the business off the market, then we expect them to pay us an abort fee, which is kind of half or a third of what we get if it's sold.
Oh shit, quite a bit.
We need that because otherwise we'd go bust.
Is that if they take it off the market as well as if they go to another broker, or can they not do that?
They
anyway?
can't go to another broker for 2 or 3 years when they sign our contract. But if they do sell, they have to usually pay us at least 2% of the transaction. And then we have a ratchet where if we make them a lot more money than we agreed at the beginning, you know, the target price, then they may end up paying us as much as 5% of the whole deal. But they're happy to do that because they've usually made a lot more than they thought they would at the beginning. You know, so everyone walks away pretty happy at the end in those situations.
Yeah.
You know, they might have to write us a check of 500 grand, but if they've walked away with 12 million when they thought they were going to make 10, actually they don't really give a shit about the fees, you know?
Yeah, true. Did you ever get screwed in the early days then?
Yeah.
Prior to having tighter contracts and shit? Absolutely.
Screwed a number of times. So I'd say a couple of the big times were in the early years when when it took us almost 4 years to do that first deal. I did a deal in about year 2, but we didn't get paid on it because our paperwork was so flimsy. The buyer managed to wriggle out of paying us, and he ripped us off for about 30 grand. Now, at that time, that was a huge amount of money for us. I was absolutely mortified, and he literally was a ruthless bastard. I've actually sold him several things since and made a lot of money out of that guy. But
how does that work?
Because I got my paperwork right and I made sure I made it up in future deals that I did with him, you know.
But even though he was such a cunt, or was he?
Well, yes, he was. But I tell you what, he taught me so much. You know, he went on to make 40 million quid, this guy, out of fire alarms. He made, out of domestic alarms that you have in your house, he had 5,000 people, customers like you and me, just paying him 150 quid a year. You know, 5,000 people. And it was a great business. You know?
Only 5,000? Wait, so 5?
So...
That's like 600k a year revenue. No, more, 750.
That was, so he's making about £150 per person.
Oh, okay.
But it was a great business by the end. Some of them were bigger customers probably, but it was, you know, he sold it to a private equity business for 40 million last year. Incredible business, you know.
Yeah. That's a pretty big one.
But he's a ruthless bastard, and yeah, he obviously taught me a lot in the early days about getting your contract right. We had lawyers then draft up contracts and agreements, and it was just, you know, we haven't been screwed that badly since. There's a couple of times that people have tried it. There've been times where you work for 2 years on a deal, and then the biggest problem you have when you're selling a business is what they've told you isn't true. They tell you they're making 2 million profit, they're not. So that's why you have to protect yourself, because when you get into due diligence, which is essentially people checking the documentation, people checking that what you've told them is correct, and lawyers and accountants be poring over the accounts and all these things, if you haven't told them the truth, then the price goes down. It doesn't go up. You know, so, you know, then the seller might decide, well, I'm not selling it then on that basis, you know. So then you might have been you might have worked for 2 years for not very much. So at that point, you also need to be paid something. Otherwise, you know, your business won't work otherwise. So
would you always have a retainer from day one plus a bullshit fee, whatever you want to call it?
A bought fee.
A bought fee. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it has to work like that. I mean,
people?
the only time that I'd make an exception is when I've worked with someone before. Maybe it'd be cheaper the second time around because you trust them. Yeah. You know, occasionally I act for buyers. I don't like acting for buyers because I think it's a lot harder to do deals. When you have a seller that's motivated to sell his business, it's much easier to get a deal done. You know, when you work for a buyer, they can be a lot more choosy. They might not really know what they want. They might be using several other brokers to look for things. So if someone else brings in something else that's better, they might just buy that. You know, they might just find a business internally that they like, you know, and you don't get paid. So I try and avoid working for buyers. There's a couple of exceptions. There are some big private equity firms in London that I work for, and they're probably my best clients in a lot of ways because all I ever have to do for them is one meeting. I will introduce them to the target that they're trying to buy, and they will take it from there and do everything. They do all the work. So I won't even hear from them until they've done the deal, and then they'll just wire me the cash. And I say to people, that's the kind of best hour, you know, of your year, if you get one of those away.
Yeah.
You know, and I've done several like that. And so, of course, if that buyer phones and says he wants something, I will put the time in. Because he's serious, you know, he's they're very wealthy, they act very quickly. They've got a very good in-house team that can do their acquisitions, so they don't need us.
Yeah. So, a few questions then. What's the biggest deal you've personally done?
Yeah, the one in February where it was 11 times changed hands, that guy will make about £15 million probably. That was one of the biggest.
What about the 40?
So I didn't do that transaction. He sold his business for 40, and I read about it in the press. I sold him 3 acquisitions whilst he was building that business. The first one he didn't pay me for, but he paid me for the second 2.
Yeah.
He sold to a big PE firm last year, but for that amount of money. So yeah, so they're the kind of ranges. I've been close to doing some bigger ones. I mean, 15 doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start off doing things for £1 million or £2 million, it takes a while to get to that level.
And what would an average be? And how many deals through like Morphos?
Yeah, so like I counted that I've done about 50 over the 13 years. It's about 4 a year. But bear in mind, we did none in the first 4 years. You know, an average year might be 5 or 6. We also raise money for people now, which is another big string to our bow. So, startups like yourself or businesses that just need to raise money to grow, we're quite good at that now. So we've got lots of good contacts with lenders and finance businesses or just private individuals that are wealthy. And so a big part of my career now is I've made a lot of people a lot of money, right? And there's at least 20 guys out there that I can call up and say, look, I'm raising money for X, some business that you might be starting, or some business that, another contact might be starting, and say, look, would you like to put some money into this? We think it's interesting, and so that is a newer string to our bow, but it's quite exciting.
Yeah, cool. So to simplify then, to make it, to give an example then, so if I came to you, let's just say hypothetically, I have this business which I want to sell for 10 million quid, thereabouts. I'm just sick of it, I want to sell it. I'm the seller, you're obviously the broker. What's the process from right at the start to selling? And firstly, how do we know each other then? Do we usually not know each other? Do I approach you? Would you approach me? So I suppose that's the first part. And then what happens? So
almost all the businesses we sell are via referrals. So someone that we know, will introduce us to someone that they know.
Yeah.
So I'm selling a healthcare chain at the moment of several healthcare homes, retirement homes, and they are just friends of friends. But it's quite hard to win mandates if you just don't know them. If you're just complete random, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to win that mandate, in my experience. So the referral thing, the networking thing is the way to do it. But essentially we come and see you. As I said, we spend quite a bit of time getting to know them and interviewing them. So we really want to know what they tell us is correct.
Yeah.
Especially on the financials. So we pour through their accounts, their management accounts. We want to see all the kind of stuff. We want to know all the skeletons before we agree to potentially selling them, because that's how the pitfalls later on, you kind of want to close off as many of those as you can. There's always surprises, there are always things they don't tell you, but the majority of the time, if you spend a couple of months getting to know them at least, you've got a much better chance of doing the deal. If they're unrealistic on how much money they want, we'd walk away. If we think that they are going to be too difficult to work with, we also walk away. Because our time is limited. It's different from an e-commerce business where once the platform's in place, it goes viral, doesn't it? But we're consultants at the end of the day. Our hours in the day are our hours in the day. So you can only spin so many plates. You want to back the right horse, one that's going to get over the line. So with the seller, we talk to them about, have they been approached in the past? We start forming a list of all the companies that might have asked if they could buy them. We do our own research. We've got several researchers that will go and put together a list of maybe 100 buyers. We then whittle that down probably to 50 with the seller. And then we send them a document, an anonymous teaser document, a bit like your flyer that you're putting out for your business, a couple of pages. Try not to give away too much information, just literally enough to either get a yay or nay on. The people who say we'd like more information, they sign a non-disclosure agreement, then they'll get a kind of 30 or 40 page pack, which is the all bells and whistles document, along with all the financials that they might request. Then we might meet 10 of those companies. Obviously in Corona, it was all about Zoom meetings for those. But you might do 3 days of it's literally a parade. You do the same meeting 12 times, which is my seller and me talking about the business, doing exactly the same meeting. It takes 2 or 3 hours each time. You might do 3 or 4 a day. And then at that point, you'll ask for offers. You'll want some indicative offers from the people who are really interested. We'd hope to get at least kind of 3 or 4 offers on that basis, and then you pick the one you want to run with. The buyer will then insists on exclusivity, which means you can't talk to anyone else until you've either done the deal or the buyer's legally withdrawn. Then the interesting bit really is the lawyers take over, and they negotiate the share purchase agreement, which is a massive document, 70 pages, 80 pages long easily. They can be arguing about that for months, these lawyers. Obviously we'll be involved as well, and that'll be coming back and forth for months on end, and you just hope that the business that you're selling keeps performing in that time. The last thing you want is a dip, and you just hope that your seller keeps his cool, because it gets emotional, it gets stressful. People can get really upset, at the end, because they can see the money, but they can also see...
That's what I felt like seeing on a small scale.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said to you at the beginning, it's the biggest moment of their lives. Maybe, with the exception of the kid or whatever, but, it's pretty much, there's not much that tops that, is there? Because their whole life is then, sorted, or they think it is. Yeah. So, and then, literally you'll get to the kind of, we call it the completion. When the share purchase agreement is signed, that is when you literally, you go to the pub and you order a bottle of champagne and you down it. And, the funds flow. That's the big day when the funds flow, which is usually about a week later. Literally the lawyer calls up and distributes the money.
So on that, so maybe it's just me being a fucking weird entrepreneurial type, but I reckon a lot of people listening, because like you obviously read about XYZ business selling, like particularly people watching probably like e-commerce brands that have been acquired, whatever, like Movement watches, 100 million, fucking loads of examples. So two questions off that then. Well, actually first question is, so how long typically from like a general handshake, this is what we're going to try and do, like you agreed to buy my business for 10 million quid, between that day and the share purchase agreement, how long does that typically take?
At least a few months. It's very, very common that may be, offer agreed in writing, which is like the heads of terms document, we call it, which is probably 6 pages long, which just spells out the basics. I'm going to pay you 10 million for your company. I'm going to give you 8 million up front. And you're going to have to do this, this, and this to get the next 2 million. You're going to have to work for me. You're going to have to re-sign these contracts. You're going to have to do this. You can't work for anyone else for 3 years. All those kind of things. And then, at least a few months. Honestly, when I sit down with the seller, when we're having our first meeting, I say the process is at least a year. If we do it in less than a year, I'm delighted. If we do it in less than 18 months, I'm usually pretty happy, to be honest.
And do people get excited on the day that a deal looks like it might happen, or are they usually they know it's going to take a few months?
Most sellers are very naive. They haven't been through the process before. They wouldn't even know what these terms mean. They have no idea that the lawyer, what the lawyer will do, or that they might that they might spend 12 weeks negotiating a document. I mean, you've got to realise lawyers aren't just doing your deal. They're working on 20 other deals, right? So they're not...
Yeah, and they're not slow.
They're slow, and there's no incentive for them to really do it any quicker, because often they're billing by the hour. So
I think in my very limited experience, I feel like lawyers and accountants are living in a different generation. I think like... I was looking at this myself for this new business I'm running, and I found something called C Legals, which you may or may not have heard of, but it just seems so modern and quick compared
absolutely.
to like going to a fucking big city law firm or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're in a startup situation like yours, of course you want to keep the cost down as low as possible. So,
but also just speed.
Yeah, speed. I think, look, when you're selling something for a lot of money, speed is not of the essence. It's getting it right, isn't it? Yeah. You don't want any fuck ups, right? You want it to say what it says. There are all sorts of things in that SPA that can come back and bite you if you don't get it right. So often people are arguing about things called warranties and indemnities. Yeah. Now that is a big part of the agreement. So if you're warrantying something, or that you're saying something's correct and it turns out not to be, the buyer can come back and take the money back potentially. So you want to be watertight on these things.
Yeah.
You know? And those warranties can last for years. They can be 7 years of comeback.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know if you've read much about Michael Lynch, autonomy, and Hewlett Packard.
Heard of him. Yeah.
Yes, I mean Hewlett Packard are coming back at him on that sale that he did to them. You know, they're suing him for billions of dollars, right?
So effectively, he got paid for selling the business, and now they're saying what he said wasn't true, so they want the money back.
Essentially,
Which sounds like a nightmare.
allegedly, yeah. It is a nightmare. So his financial director has already pleaded guilty in the United States and is serving a prison term. Right.
Is this like super dodgy then?
Well, that's what's been. I think he has been convicted. Actually, the US government are trying to extradite him to face charges in the US. Yeah. So Michael Lynch is a billionaire from this, but allegedly there's been a lot of wrongdoing on the sale. But obviously, you know, who are we to know? But the smaller point is with the SPAs, you pay the money because you want that high quality advice.
SPA is share purchase agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. And then, so funds flowing, as you said, because I'm just asking the questions that I think anyone will want to know. So like someone sells a business for 10 million quid, you sign that agreement. How long is that period till someone, and how long is that period between actually getting the money then? And also, like, is that literally just, you just check your online banking one day and it's in there?
Usually the money will be there within 5 working days. I mean, if it's a lot of money, maybe it's slightly longer. Generally, like the money usually is coming from like the US or Asia or Europe, you know, or somewhere that it's not just like sitting there.
Yeah.
It will always go to the lawyer. The lawyer will then disperse it. And literally he will have a list of shareholders he's got to pay out. So which is quite often the case, there are multiple shareholders.
Yeah.
They will literally pay each of those the individual amount that they want, you know, that they deserve.
And
then earn.
Yeah. And it's like more nitty-picky questions. I'm just interested.
Yeah.
Is that, so if I sold a business, say I was a UK resident, blah, 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 capital gains tax, am I getting that money net of taxes, or am I getting that money and then have a tax liability?
No, you get the gross amount and your tax liability sits with you. So you then need to sit down with your accountant pretty sharpish and work out
and not spend all of it.
What not to spend, so obviously in the UK we have something called entrepreneurs relief, which means that if you're a director of your company, you've had it for more than 3 years, and you own more than 5%, the first £1 million you earn from a deal, from a sale, comes out at 10% tax, which is really good.
Yeah.
It used to be the first 10 million, but Rishi Sunak changed it last year, which was very annoying.
Yeah.
So it's now
like Rishi Sunak needs to fucking sell a business.
It's now 20% of the next X million above that. So, you know, your tax bill is probably kind of 20%, you know, flat on a big sale.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe slightly less, which is obviously a lot less than, you know, PAYE. So, you know, one of the other bits of advice we always give clients is that building up the cash in the business is a really good idea, because you don't want to pay 50% income tax on your cash if you can leave it in the company, because that will be added to the price at the end.
Yeah.
So, and that can make a huge difference, you know, for people. If they built up a couple of £1 million in the bank.
Is that always the case then? So you'd have the business purchase price plus the excess net cash, basically?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, we call it cash-free, debt-free. So the excess cash minus any debts in the company.
Yeah.
That also includes the working capital. Working capital is the amount of money it takes to run the business. Now, that's obviously a hard number to define exactly. The accountants on both sides will argue that right up to the deadline day. Usually it's a couple of months cash, you know, a couple of months of costs to run the business. That's kind of the approximate amount that I always tell sellers.
Yeah.
They often think that's their money, but it isn't. You can't leave a business that
so
hasn't got any petrol
the
in the tank.
working capital would be taken off the net amount due to them from the business bank account.
Exactly. I describe it as like the petrol in the car.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
You can't.
Yeah,
you can
I learned that the bloody hard way last year twice.
Yeah.
And a lot of people watching this probably haven't learned that yet, but it's very true in any business. Probably even e-com's actually probably arguably very cash flow positive if nothing goes wrong, because you get paid in 3 days from Stripe.
Yeah,
or
which
Shopify
is
payments.
amazing.
Whereas a lot of businesses, I spoke to a guy yesterday, runs a drinks company, and they're on like net 120 days with all their suppliers. So they could be making £1 million profit, but fucking have no money in the bank, basically.
Well, some of the biggest failures we've ever seen are companies that spend the money that they get in advance, you know, and then the contracts are pulled and they don't have the money anymore. They've spent it, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
So there was a big American company. It might have been that time when you were interning for Morphose.
I'll come on to that.
There was a big American business that ended up going bust. They were one of the richest families in New York, and they had a contract with a big shopping mall in the US. They had 1,000 shopping malls, and they were paid quarterly in advance by this shopping mall owner. And that was a lot of money, right? It was $50 million.
Why would they be paid like that in advance?
Well, $50 million a quarter in advance, right? Of course, then this company, my client, were using that money for other things. You know, they weren't...
Lifestyle.
It was lifestyle.
Private
jets.
Mykonos.
They were, you know, they were at the front row of every basketball game. There were private jets. There were boats. There were all sorts of things you can imagine, right?
Boats and hoes.
So, you know, but it turned out to be a really sad story. So when that client pulled the plug on them, which clients do, used another provider, they couldn't afford to pay back that money. They couldn't afford to provide the services, if you see what I mean, because they'd spent it all. They went from being one of the richest families in New York to being destitute. You know, terrible. The son, who's only a couple of years older than me, actually,
would they not at that level have like any sense of risk management? Because even I now, 26, would be like, fuck, I'm not blowing on lifestyle until other shit's taken care of.
Well, you'd think so. So the great granddad started the business in like the 1930s, built this amazing business. It was the biggest cleaning company in America. The granddad takes over, who then really messed it up, I'd say. The son was earmarked to take it over, who was slightly older than me, but he was a drug addict. He was a complete nightmare.
Bet he was growing up in that money.
Yeah, and he actually committed suicide in the end.
Shit.
Took a drug overdose. So it was, you know, it's one of those really sad stories about kind of mismanaging money. But, you know, that kind of third generation is always a nightmare when they've grown up with that amount of wealth. And it's a very common tale.
Yeah.
They've never had to earn a penny. They live a life of Riley. They become useless. You know, they're useless people because they've got nothing. They've got just nothing to give anyone, have they? Never had to work a day in their lives.
There's a lot of that around this part of town.
Yeah.
Southwest London.
Sure.
Not a lot, but, you know, statistically not a lot, but there's still quite a few. I want to come on to a different thing in a minute, but so have you ever been to like a big post-acquisition fucking piss-up party? I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's been like the biggest / most memorable one? Because you read about this shit in like billionaire biographies and stuff.
I mean, no, it's not usually on that scale. Usually there's several celebrations over the course of the following year, and it's a combination of them taking us out to say thanks, us then taking them out to say thanks. We might do a trip somewhere, so, you know, I might invite them somewhere to like the Hong Kong Sevens, or I might invite them to, you know, the golf at Augusta, or I might invite them to the Ashes or the Lions. You know, that's a typical thing I'll do for someone when they've paid me a significant fee. You know, I don't just take them out for dinner or take them on a good thank you trip. Yeah. It's slightly harder these days because of entertainment tax rules, but even if I end up paying it for it myself, I'm usually like, look, these people, they've been good to us, they've looked after us, you know. And it's that old thing, you know, they don't forget that you've made them a lot of money. You know, they if it deal's gone well, they're generally a pretty good friend or contact for life. They'll refer you to other people that they know. You know, rich people, successful people usually know other rich, successful people.
Yeah.
You know, the amount of contacts we've had just because like they're mate at the golf club or the sailing club or
golf,
the rugby,
football,
the
cricket,
tobogganing club, or whatever they're doing. They've got people that are just doing things you can't imagine. So That's the best reference you can get.
Yeah.
But some pretty wild times at the Hong Kong Sevens or Tokyo World Cup. You know, I know I bumped into you there. You know,
yeah, two years ago, almost to the day actually.
Yeah, they tend to be the bigger celebrations.
Yeah, geez, I wasn't celebrating an exit there, but it's still good fun. I think I was like 9 pints deep by 2 p.m. It was very aggressive. Couldn't see any of the rugby, but that was a good time. Okay, so interesting first hour. This dog's trying to eat my shit. I just want to bring it back to how we actually met them because I think it's relevant, but also, yeah, just be interesting. So, yeah, when I originally dropped out of uni, which I think the actual first podcast like last year I did that spoke about all that shit prior to the fucking Neon Beach scandal got taken down because my flatmate Fred didn't want it up, etc. So yeah, I dropped out of uni when I was 19 after 6 weeks, and then when I did a placement with Morphose, which is how I met Nick. And yeah, but basically the first time, to be honest, that I'd been exposed to, I guess, entrepreneurship and business other than just like reading bullshit online and put a suit on and fucking like I was commuting every day and shit.
There's some great photos, aren't there? There's some great photos.
Yeah, it was about a 5 month period, I think. I think it was like kind of just maybe November to March or something, 4 or 5 month period. But yeah, I probably cite that as I definitely wanted to be an entrepreneur prior to that, but I didn't really know. I'd never really met anyone that was actually like making any money. And I think I've said it before on another podcast. That was probably the first time I thought, oh, you don't have to be like a rapper or a footballer to make money.
Sure.
In a way, which I think is probably true to a lot of people. You think if you're not like an A-list celebrity, then how can you make money? But I mean, maybe slightly different now because social media is fucking everywhere. But yeah, kind of like what you were saying, like that's the first time I probably realised like the value in like knowing people and just networking in general. Because I remember actually famously another guy that we were working with called David, who I don't think you work with anymore. But I remember throwing a business card across the table because I had like a business card and I thought I was a baller and shit. Just like getting all the fancy corporate stuff, wearing a fucking suit every day, which I would never do again. I threw a business card across the table to someone in a meeting, and he like took me aside afterwards, like, that's not how you do this like this meeting people thing. It's just a funny story that I remember.
I didn't know that.
I remember being so embarrassed afterwards.
He would have been horrified by that, right?
Yeah, he was. It was somewhere in Berkeley Square, which
oh God, right.
Been to many times since, loads of bloody nightclubs and shit around there, and Sexy Fish and stuff, where I've taken girls on overpriced lunches in the past. But yeah, it was just an interesting time because you don't realise like how little you know about things until you know a little bit more. And obviously I'm still fucking learning shit in the entrepreneurial sphere, but back then I knew literally nothing about anything.
Yeah.
And it was just reflection on that time. It's quite funny now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we obviously probably struggled a bit with you because we didn't really think it was what you wanted to do. You know,
it wasn't.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It was but
it was still interesting.
But it was, you know, it's hard when people obviously aren't quite right for the corporate finance world because they do want to do something completely different, but you kind of want to give them the best experience that you can.
Yeah.
And you know, I did a similar internship with a law firm. I remember when I was 17, and I absolutely hated it. It was, one of the best internships I ever did because it put me off doing law. It was a shipping law firm. It was the most boring thing you could ever imagine. Yeah. They were talking about this boat that had crashed off the coast of Scotland in 1992, and they were still arguing it in 1998 or wherever I was there. You know, it was so boring. Yeah. I was like, I cannot imagine this being my life. And I think it was kind of similar to you. You were so bored by it, weren't you, or unimpressed?
I was probably impressed by the people I met, and that's the point I'm trying to make. I was impressed by the people I met and the things that opened my eyes to. But yeah, I knew prior to that I didn't want to do, I guess, a corporate job, and even shit like wearing a suit. I mean, look at me now, wear fucking orange trousers around the house.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think certain people love that shit. You know, go to fucking Durham Uni, study philosophy, and then it's just not me, and it's probably not a lot of my audience. And it was kind of then and there that I was like, I want to make a lot of money, but I don't want to do this corporate stuff. So I'll have to figure out how to be like an internet entrepreneur or whatever.
Absolutely.
Which is probably a realisation that a lot of people, mostly watching this podcast, have at some point. And then they set out on figuring out how to actually do that, which I'm still fucking figuring out. Had a little taste of it. But
well, I think what I admire about you is that you've gone off and done something you actually want to do. You haven't just done something that you thought you should do, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of my career has been doing a job that I think people probably expect me to do. You know, it's a money making job. You know, it's not kind of, you know, it's probably not the job I dreamt of doing when I was a kid, right? But it's a job that is okay. It makes money, and I don't hate it. But I think you've generally gone off and done something that you really actually love. Now, I know it's been a rocky road recently, but you know, overall, you're delighted that you've gone down this road, aren't you? As opposed to
couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels definitely like the right thing, and it makes the challenges more palpable.
Yeah,
because you think, well, this is what I'll be doing anyway.
But you know, we have probably 1 or 2 interns every summer.
Yeah, I was going to ask that.
You stayed a bit longer than most. I'm in contact with some of them. One of them still works for us, and she's probably our best employee.
I think I know she is. Yeah.
A girl called Eve Kilgour. She's 27 now, unbelievably, which it's just crazy because she's been working with me since I thought, almost a baby. But she can now at 27 almost run a deal without any help from me. Almost, I'd say probably 90%. She probably doesn't realise it yet, but that's the kind of training period that it takes, to get to the point. I don't think she's capable of winning business yet. She couldn't go and win a pitch, I don't think, without me being there. But once I give her a deal, she can pretty much do most of it now from start to finish. So, but she's quite similar to you. She doesn't actually enjoy M&A at all. She just does it for the money and because she's good at it. She has a business on the side which is making wicker baskets. Macrabby, I think it's called, or
I think you mentioned this before.
She spends her Saturday and Sunday, and if she's watching this, she'll be laughing at me, making baskets for like £30, for a basket that takes her 4 hours to make. But she loves it. So I said, look, you could do both. And I think that's the kind of great thing about your generation, well, still my generation, is that we can have lots of jobs. We don't just have to have one job now.
Yeah.
You can do lots of things at the same time. As long as you pay the bills, there's no reason why you can't run an e-commerce brand and do something else on the side, Obviously,
like a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a lot more work than I thought it would be.
Yeah, but back in the day, your dad, my dad, they had one job, didn't they?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Definitely a generational shift and a cultural shift.
But we're so lucky, I think we've got an iPhone where you can walk around. Just you don't ever have to be in the office. You can just be walking around on that thing, kind of doing what you need to do. Certainly in my job, I don't need to be in an office ever, really.
Yeah.
Apart from to go and see clients. I just need to be on the phone all day.
Yeah.
But looking back to that internship, I mean, the work we set you, it's very boring. It's very tedious, that research kind of role.
Yeah, it was because I didn't really fucking know how to do anything else, did I? I mean, I remember sitting in the British Library researching businesses. But it was, I think, the point I'm trying to make on that, amongst others, is, the actual work itself might have been very tedious, but 2 things. Firstly, I got to go and try commuting and wearing a suit in central London for the first time. And when you've never done that before, that's fucking cool and exciting. And I remember I literally would walk around Mayfair taking pictures of cars. Yeah. And I still got pictures of those on my Instagram if you scroll back to like 2013, 14. And that was so exciting because I'd never seen that shit before. Whereas now you could go down Sloane Street, you see a fucking LaFerrari, it's just... And it sounds flippant and stupid, but when you've never seen that sort of stuff,
it's
you
amazing.
Think, it's a different world. There's other possibilities, and I don't have to do this boring thing and whatever if I don't want to. But then also, it was meeting people and firstly learning how to speak to people and meet people, which I think I'm pretty good at now, to be fair, which could be better, but I've got a lot better at. And just even doing shit like this podcast, with new people, it becomes a fucking process, and by definition you get better at it. But also seeing what other people are doing, because by default, when you grow up, pretty much up to the age of like 21 usually, when you sort of finish uni, or particularly before uni for like 18, your life and your lifestyle and your network and the people you know and the things you see about life are just given to you. You basically have no choice in it. So if you grow up in, like me, the north of England, and go to a state school, very fine life, like happy and shit, but that was what I saw. Whereas if you grow up in fucking Africa, that's what you see and that's your experience. Do you know what I mean? And the other extreme is, if you grow up and go to Eton school and you're surrounded by fucking parents, billionaires the whole time, that's what you see. And I spoke about the problems and the pros and cons of that with Iman on the previous episode, which will have gone out by now. But yeah, it's just interesting. And then when you actually get to start doing your own shit, whether it's on an internship or not doing your own shit, but you get to step out of what you were previously doing. And for most people, that's going to uni or getting a job or doing an internship. It's just interesting. And you probably don't have the perspective on things at the time to appreciate the insight it gave you then. But then looking back now, it's like, I almost think if I didn't do that internship, I mean, I probably would have got into entrepreneurship anyway, but like that was certainly the first. It comes back to like the whole experience breeds confidence thing. Like I met people that had made millions building businesses themselves and they weren't famous. So then it was like, I remember a few months later launching my first clothing brand. Literally after that, in March 2015, Gentry Club, fucking shit brand. But I probably wouldn't have done that unless I'd met someone that was like talking about it or whatever over a few drinks.
Totally.
So that's kind of the interesting side of that. And also as well, I think what you're saying about like brokerage and so on and so on, which is why I want to get you on, is I think there's a problem which is caused by social media of everyone thinking they have to be an entrepreneur, they have to be, I don't know, like the number one guy at the top of the business or whatever it is. Whereas actually a lot of people could probably be more happy and make more money and do better in like either A, like a corporate job, which was never for me, or like B, potentially being like a broker like yourself and probably make a lot more money in rather than trying to build like any business, or for most of my viewers probably like an e-com digital marketing business, because they feel like everyone on social media is doing it. Whereas most people on social media that are talking about doing it are probably making no money, or they're hiding all the problems they've had, which I was public about my recent ones for that purpose. And I just think it's a conversation people probably need to have with themselves, because no one posts about being an M&A broker on social media, but everyone fucking posts about running an e-com brand or drop shipping or having an OnlyFans account more relevantly recently. And if you can fucking make money from that, then fair play. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's kind of the point I wanted to make on that.
I think the M&A thing, it's not super sexy, but the exposure you get to businesses is invaluable. You see so many different businesses. People phone you up with all sorts of like inquiries. I had one yesterday. A friend of mine's got 21 BMW garages he wants to sell. Can you come and see him? You just never know where it's going to take you, which is the upside of it. You go and see this guy, he's got 20, that's impressive, right? He's got 21 BMW franchises. He's built from nothing. This guy from the East End, he's obviously a bit of a jack the lad, and, but good for him. He didn't go to private school. Like, he's a kind of just a worker. Yeah. And he's wise as, anyone. And he knows, he's kind of knows how to make a pound, right? So the thing with the M&A thing is just, you do see a lot of interesting insights into wealthy people, how they build businesses, the mistakes they make, is the important thing. And actually that makes you a better business person, watching them, watching what the good ones do versus what the really bad ones do. And the real pitfalls, I always think, when you're running a business is spending the profit too hard along the way, which is a very classic mistake people make. And this isn't a slight against you, but
I definitely did that. To an extent.
But lots of people
in my ignorance.
Lots of people go out and buy the Range Rover, the Ferrari, first class around the world, when actually if they reinvested those profits, they would be a lot richer. Yeah. There's a balance. You don't want to live like a pauper when you're running a successful business. You should go on holiday. You should have an okay car. If you want to fly, in a nice way, you should, but you shouldn't be kind of pretending that you've sold the business when you haven't. You know, living like someone who's made 10 million when actually...
I think it's social media.
Yeah, I think it's ego, it's social media, it's keeping up with the Joneses, as we say, you know, the old, you know, it's my mate's got a Ferrari, so I've got to have one. It's all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I've got a client that you know quite well. I won't mention him, but, you know, he went out and bought an amazing supercar, you know, a year before he was hoping to sell his business, paid kind of 7 figures for this supercar. And had to sell it, unfortunately, for a lot less than he paid for it.
Yeah, I thought it was someone else.
Yeah, I won't mention his name, but he thought he was going to sell his business for a huge amount of money. He didn't. Ends up having to sell some of the things that he thought he was going to buy, and it's kind of a sad situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
there's levels to expenditure on supercars.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never owned one. I own a very simple car because I try not to be flash. I'm not a flash guy. I don't own a flash watch. You know, I have some property and I live quite a flash lifestyle, you know, so I like going on holiday and traveling. But when I'm walking around, you will never see me in a Gucci jacket or a Rolex watch.
Fuck that, Christ. Well, I did like the watches, but yeah, no, it's so true. Like it's particularly in the e-commerce and digital marketing sphere. And the whole like online money, Wi-Fi money, what the fuck you want to call it, like Forex, e-com, digital marketing, drop shipping, all this sort of stuff that's become possible in the last sort of 5 years mainly. There is a massive culture of that, and I was one of those guys to an extent. That I was doing very well for like 3 years, but you know, I mean, I liked cars, so I bought some cars. I don't regret that, but the problem is, to an even bigger extent, you get guys that don't even run businesses and are making 20 grand a year buying Stone Island jackets for 600 quid. Like that's a thing. I've never done that. So it's all relative. Like I was making 200-300 grand a year when I was 22. So I was buying stupid cars and shit that were heavily financed. But yeah, it's just an interesting culture because prior to social media, I don't know if that would have been as much of a thing, or if it's because of like the fact that people can actually start a business now and genuinely make really good money pretty quick because of like, you know, Facebook ads, TikTok, whatever, like so much quicker now in like e-commerce and just genuinely online. But it's always like humbling when you then meet, you know, like someone that's actually made a lot of money, like sort of 10, 20, 30, 50 million, and they're always wearing an Apple Watch. And then, so I've started to, I mean, in the past year I've done that for many reasons, but I guess it's part of growing up. But
absolutely, I think
it is an interesting process.
It is growing up. You don't want to show people how rich you are. It's not a good trait. People don't like you for it generally. You know, it's kind of, you want to be anonymous as you can, as we said earlier. You know, it's interesting that the car thing always reminds me of footballers, right? Specifically Premiership footballers. And when we grow up, most boys that play football want to be a Premiership footballer and play for Chelsea and earn 300 grand a week. But I think it's one of the worst lives you can imagine.
It's funny you say that because we went to Chelsea the other week and you said this. So yeah, build on that because I think it's an interesting perspective.
You live your life in reverse. So you are super successful at 20, 25. Your career starts to fade as you reach 30. You get your last contract at maybe 32. You know, you retire at 35 if you're lucky. Right, and maybe if you're lucky, you bank some of that money. You haven't wasted it all. You know, generally they're not that financially astute, so they might have spent a lot of the money along the way, wasted a lot. You know, the smart ones put it into houses and investments. There aren't that many smart ones. You know, they generally end up pretty useless and unhappy in their late 30s. There isn't much, you know, of a career anywhere else.
Unless you become a manager like Gerrard or something.
You know, for every Gerrard, there's 20 or 30 players in that Liverpool squad that aren't a manager. For every Carragher on Sky Sports, great job, there's 20 or 30 that, who the hell are they and what are they doing? And they probably didn't make anywhere near as much money as you think, or they didn't save any of it, you know, because they were living the life of Riley, you know, and they had all the women, cars and champagne then, but suddenly in their 40s, they're pretty kind of depressed. Maybe they've got injuries, you know, they've got a bad back, they've got bad knees. You know, I wouldn't wish that life particularly on anyone. I don't think it's a happy life. I think, you know, your best years, hopefully, you know, life as you get older gets better,
exponentially better. Yeah, that's interesting because you said that. I think, yeah, like probably like a lot of people, you look at like footballers that are fucking 25, 26, my age, you think, oh, like almost like bitter, oh, for fuck's sake, you know, that like someone like Jack Grealish is making 300 grand. Like, I'm probably terrible at it. Like a lot of people, because of social media, you look at someone like that and think they're making 300 grand a week. But I thought I was balling making that per year.
But you've got a brain that isn't going to fade at 30 whenever.
So when you
Jack
said that,
Grealish retires, right? Jack Grealish is going to retire at 30 something, right? He's going to be so rich it maybe won't matter. But you know, most of them aren't that smart. Most of them probably don't make great life decisions. Most of them have multiple wives. You know, a lot of that money, gambling, drugs, you know, it's just a kind of spiral of decline usually when they stop. And I don't imagine they live that happy, great lives, to be honest. The smart ones go into management or you work for Sky. They probably have a good life because it gives them a purpose, gives them something to do in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, get up and actually do something. But the rest of them, what are you going to do all day? You play golf, take the kids to school.
Yeah, very true. I think, yeah. It's an interesting way to look at it.
You're not 65, you're 35. It's kind of a bit sad, isn't it?
Yeah, because at least in entrepreneurship, well, just business and work in general, but I guess for this audience, entrepreneurship, business, yeah, you would hope that you get exponentially better.
Of course.
And therefore, over the long term, granted there's ups and downs, you make exponentially more money as well.
More skills, more contacts, and more money, for sure.
Yeah. So just on that, because it's a point I've raised in a few previous podcasts, it's like I lost a load of money and I said, well, but the one thing I didn't lose was experience and contacts. And that is very true. And like, luckily or fortunately, it's probably a better word, I feel like I've built up a very good network for my age, given it's one that I feel like I largely built, didn't have it when I came out of uni in a way. And yeah, like how much, obviously a lot of your shit, it works, it's pretty much all network, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think networking and having a network and just fucking people skills in general, kind of old school business skills, I suppose, no way to put it, is something that, and myself included again, like this whole e-commerce, online, you know, the Wi-Fi money generation, I think overlooked because you do all the shit online, and even now, like I spend 80% of my time at a fucking screen, and I'm very conscious of it. Like, I'd actually be probably more beneficial if I went out and met at the minute, like investors, different people, potential employees, all that sort of shit. So like, I suppose, yeah, in general, I'm just becoming more and more aware of the importance of it, and I think this generation doesn't understand it enough. And by default, because we're on social media and shit, no one really has any fucking people skills anymore. But obviously you, particularly within Morphose, I think are very good at that. So how do you get good at that? And what does that involve in your world?
I think people skills is quite a natural thing. Most people kind of have it or they don't. You can get better at it by spending time around people who have good people skills. I think that's how you do it. You know, if it's, you know, and again, all due respect to developers, if it's 10 computer developers in a room, I don't imagine the chat at lunch is that amazing, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's 10 sales guys in a room who work for whoever, a bank or whatever, you know, their chat is kind of more interesting usually. It's funny, isn't it? You know, they're telling stories, they're like telling jokes, they know how to make people laugh.
Yeah.
And it gets people's attention, really. So for me, networking, I've always... And, you know, a lot of my friends and contacts will laugh at this. I've always based it around sport events. So, as you know, I'm a big Chelsea fan. I'm a big rugby fan. I'm a big cricket fan. I'm a big tennis fan. I like going to the golf, the horse racing, you know, all those things. And, you know, I'm not just talking about in the UK. I go all around the world doing those events. The people you meet at those events are usually, you know, pretty amazing. You know, you can meet, you just never know who you're going to meet. You know, so you might take some clients with you and you might meet some clients there, wherever it might be, whether it's the Hong Kong Sevens. But the people in the room at those events are usually pretty high-end people. And you've just got to have the balls, basically, to go and talk to whoever you think might be useful to you. You know, it can just be very, very simple stuff. Just be like, you know, just go up to them and try and say something funny. And if they laugh and they want to talk, then you're away. You know, so I was at an event in London at Berry Brothers a couple of weeks ago.
What's Berry Brothers?
It's one of the most famous wine shops in London.
That sounds right.
They've got 2 acres of cellars underneath St James's and Mayfair. So it's incredible.
It's expensive real estate.
6 floors down. They've got, they sell all the wine to the rich people in London. They've got a very nice cellar. I was at an investment seminar, which was extremely boring, but it was only an hour. So I sucked it up because I knew afterwards the networking would be amazing. And there was a guy there who'd built a business called Inspecs, and it's glasses. Very simple business, glasses. He's run it for 30 years. He's now, for sure a billionaire from it. He's got factories all around the world. It's on the AIM. It's a really impressive business. And he gave a 5-minute speech, which I listened to. But afterwards, they serve us some amazing wine. He was the first person I went and spoke to. There's only 30 of us. I had 10 minutes with him, got his business card or whatever, got his kind of mobile number. And, that's a contact you just never know, do you? Like, maybe at some point I can sell him a business. Maybe at some point he's a super rich guy that wants to invest in a business. You just never know where that conversation might go. But you've got to have the confidence to go up to these people because they are just normal people.
Yeah.
As long as you don't bore them, like they don't want to talk about, boring rubbish. They probably don't even want to talk about their business. So talk about something else. Talk about how good the wine is. Talk about how good the food is, what a cool place this is, or where do you live, what are you up to? Just treat them like a human. Treat them like they're not super special. They much prefer that than if you're licking their feet. Oh, what amazing.
Yeah, I had a guy called Asher Grant on episode 12. It hasn't gone out when we're recording this, but it would have gone out by now. He runs some of the biggest nightclubs in central London. And that's what he said, because he said his black book, so to speak, so his network is incredible. Because by default, his industry is everyone's had a few drinks, which is, and he runs the show. He doesn't actually drink himself, funnily enough, but his point was he's managed to befriend all these like super high net worth people, like celebrities, etc., because he doesn't give a shit who they are really, because by definition they're just another client, as he calls them, a customer on the day. And actually that has then got him in circles where, usually people are, can I have a picture of this box? Can I ask you about your business? And it's the same thing you're saying. It's interesting because, like, they're just fucking normal people at the end of the day.
They don't.
Like everyone has the same.
They never ask them for a picture. I mean, that's like just rule number one.
Yeah.
I remember bumping into Jose Mourinho in Knightsbridge, and my girlfriend at the time was like, "Oh, go and take a picture. He's your hero." And I was like, "Do you know what? I'm not going to take.
Fuck that.
I'm not going to
cringe.
ask him for a picture because
it's not worth it."
Also, he was like, if he says no, he's no longer my hero, is he? Oh, I hate him.
Yeah, true.
So I was like, actually, no, I don't want a picture.
Yeah.
He's not my hero anymore, but when I was 10 years ago, big Chelsea fan, he's our manager, like of course he's my hero.
Who's now Roma?
Now I think he's a pretty arrogant, average kind of guy, but I was a kid then, right?
Yeah, very true. So 2 questions off the back of that then. So, well, I guess the first one, because I know a lot of people that watch this are like fucking 18 to 25, I suppose, and they, I guess, don't have the credentials to be in rooms with, I suppose, powerful, impressive, wealthy people, but B, even if they were, probably wouldn't know where the fuck to start because they maybe don't have something to talk about. Like, to those people, like, how do they network with? And it's a good question. Like, how does the average person who's say in uni or just 22 years old network with people that they want to get to know? And I suppose I kind of think I know what my answer to that is, but I'm interested to know what you'd say.
I think, I used to work for a headhunter business, and the chairman of that was a very smart guy, and he was a networking king. And he used to tell me just to write down lists of people that you'd like to know, and people that you'd love to know, and people that you'd love to be, and try and like reach out to those people and just ask them very simple, like, look, I'm a young guy, I'm trying to do this. Would you spare some time just to chat to me? Just give me 10 minutes, for a coffee. They're people that right? And then you reach out, and you try and make everyone kind of come to the left side of the list, which is your contacts, right?
Yeah.
But it takes time. You kind of have to build that contact base, but you go to the warm people that first. So, your parents' friends, your friends' parents' friends, your, whoever they might be, your just, people you meet at parties, people you have to get out there. You can't sit at home and do it. You might do the intro on LinkedIn or WhatsApp or whatever, but you got to get out there and see people. And kind of at those events, of course, in your early 20s, it's much harder. You're not going to be the king of it then. But you got to get going then, because the people you meet then, in 10 years' time, they might be pretty useful. It's a long road. You can't view networking as a short-term win. It's a long-term thing. The people that are making money, they might not make money for 20 years, some of these people that but they might be super useful when you're 40.
Yeah, very true.
So
so a few points off that. So firstly, do you think these skills to go and do it is more important than the credentials you might have in the first place? Or do you think if you're trying to speak to interesting people or get someone to respond to you on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, that you need to have done something for them to even bother? What's the most important thing?
I think look, you go after the people that are slightly known to you. You have some connection to them first, because obviously people that don't know you and you've done nothing, very, very hard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but even for me, I'm nearly 40. If I try and reach out to some big CEO of some company, he doesn't know me from Adam, he's not going to respond.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even try, to be honest. I'd only go after someone that I maybe kind of knew, because then they kind of are compelled to answer, aren't they? If you've got a second connection to them, or some sort of mutual contact, so your mutual contact thing is the way to do it, I'd say. But you got to go up to them and just be confident and say, look, I do this, I do that, this is what I'm trying to achieve.
I think again, a few things off that. It's because firstly, I surprisingly, having done relatively fuck all, but to a certain niche of people, I've done quite a lot, whatever. I get a lot of messages on Instagram now, mainly off this podcast, and I like responding to them because I don't know, you feel like you're helping people, whatever.
Yeah, but
it's also the same for people at a certain level above me in the chain. But the second point on that is, currently I'm fundraising for this new brand that I've mentioned in the previous episode for the first time. And I've been doing, and I'm very new to this process. Should have probably fucking spoke to you a lot more about it, to be fair. But and I've been, firstly, reaching out to a lot of people in my network and having very productive conversations and meetings with them, etc. But then I've also just taken the piss a little bit and messaged a few fucking billionaires that I know in this space, and obviously not had a reply. But then there's been a few people sort of in the middle that I don't know at all that have sold businesses for 8-9 figures in a similar space, and I know for a fact have sort of money that potentially you want to invest in. And I've had a few replies of a few people sort of saying very interested, but don't know who you are, blah 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 blah. And it's your point about, even if you feel like you know no one, the first contact is I don't know, your fucking uncle's friend he's probably mentioned you once.
Of course.
And I suppose it starts with if you're literally 18. Then like I was when I did the fucking placement, the first thing is probably get a little bit better at what you're trying to do, and then I think I said it in another podcast as well, probably after that is go and meet people that are your age that want to do similar things, which is what I did when I was 19, 20, 21 particularly, now 22. Then get a friendship group of people that are all doing similar shit, and then the step beyond that is get good at the shit you're doing, which for me was e-commerce. I'm still working on it, but I've done some stuff, so now I have some track record. So now when I go to people that I've met along the way, a few people who have made 7-8 figures selling big businesses, and I've met along the way in whatever capacity, that there's some actual credibility now, a few years into the game. I'm not 18 anymore, but I'm also not fucking 50 and know everyone. So then those people at that next level are actually more accessible. Yeah. But also along the way, I suppose just make sure you actually have social skills, which you said is natural, but actually to a lot of people, and even more because of social media, I feel like it's actually becoming more and more scarce. I'm not saying I'm the fucking wizard at it, but I think I'm decent at it probably A, naturally, but B, because I've met a lot of new people, and through this podcast I'm forcing myself to do even more new people. But there's so many people that I don't know, I know a few actually that like went to ridiculously good unis, whatever, but they have a fairly shit job, and I'm convinced it's because they don't have any EQ amongst any of that IQ, and they just can't speak to people. And at the end of the day, business and life is just people.
Of course.
Like, really.
Yeah.
And again, I think because of this social media generation, which is probably similar generation, but particularly like the past 5 years, and people that are coming into their like early 20s in the past 5 years, like me, it's like people hide behind a screen and forget that at the end of the day, customers, people, potential partners, investors, whatever it is, are just fucking people. They're a biological being that's assisted by technology. They're not replaced by technology. Do you know what I mean?
No, exactly. So I think your social skills in general, or your people skills, improve as you get older in general, right? They do. You know, when you're 18,
you have more life experience.
Yeah, and you can chat more. But I agree with you. I also think the giving back thing is interesting. You touched on that. So giving back is very important to me. I like interns coming into the company. They're usually kids of clients or kids of friends, which I don't like so much. Longer term, I'd like to change that, you know, at the businesses that I'm in, that we aren't just doing, you know, it's not just nepotism all the time. Because generally you don't find the best people from, you know, the fact that they're your clients' kids. We're happy to do that stuff as a favour for a week or two, but the good ones aren't generally those. They're the ones that actually want to work hard and do something, not just get something on their CV and bugger off to the next thing. But giving back's fun as well. Like it's great to be invited back. Like I've been invited back to my old school to talk to the sixth form. You know, I haven't gone because they tried to expel me like a number of times when I went to that school. They hated me. So now the fact that they want me to come back and give a talk, I'm like, well, I'm not sure I want to do that, right?
Really.
I'd probably rather go to the state school around the corner and do a talk.
Yeah.
Because I know the next step will be that they want to send 10 of their kids to our companies every summer, you know? Whereas I'd probably rather have the state school kids that actually just want to work and
do it. Joseph Roundtree where I went.
Yeah, exactly. So
those normal boys in.
So you know, the old boy nepotism club, you know, I've benefited from it hugely, so I'm not going to slate it completely, but it is about people who want to work hard and get on with it, not getting a job because your old man or your uncle or your granddad did something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and another thing on networking as well is like, I had a few guests on actually, I won't name them, but we had like kind of a bit of a debate on this because they kind of viewed networking, and they're both successful people, funnily enough, young guys, but they almost view like networking, when I brought it up, as like some like weird, like really forced, like making friends process, whereas I don't know, like maybe because of like LinkedIn culture these days and shit, it's become this weird thing. But like when I say networking, I just mean fucking meeting people. That's basically it. Yeah. And just meeting people and getting to know them and potentially working together.
Yeah, and that
like, it's not some forced, like weird process.
Exactly. You can be on a train, you can be on a plane, you could be at a lunch, you could be at the rugby, you could be at the cricket, you could be at a concert, you could be in a restaurant. You know, you could be at a members club that your friends invited you to, couldn't you? I mean, there's all sorts of people all around that are interesting. So my view is, you know, you never dismiss anyone when you meet someone at a party. You just, you know, house parties can be full of cool people, can't they? Doing cool stuff. Yeah. You know, you never know where you're going to meet someone. It's a bit like you never know where you're going to meet your wife or your husband, isn't it? Like you kind of don't shut the door on anything or anyone. Always be like, give them the time of day, listen to them, what they're up to, you know.
Yeah.
See where it takes you.
Yeah, I also think like the whole meeting new people thing, just by definition, but again, just because of social media, is like way more scary than probably maybe it used to be, but also just like it's quite nerve-wracking because like I went to meet some potential investor actually on Friday last week in Soho House via another guy that I'd met through another guy that I'd met through a mate. So again, like classic example of just the fucking chain of people. And, you know, whatever, went to meet this guy, we had fucking drinks and I sort of pitched him on what I was doing, whatever. But then 20 minutes later, he said, "Oh, do you want to come fucking sneak into this Soho house party that I've been invited to by the owners of this agency?" It was like Phantom Agency or something. And it was free fucking bar all night. So I said, yeah, cool, I'll go. I thought I'd be there for 20 minutes. Was there for like 6 hours. Ended up inviting 4 of my mates who also snuck in. By the time they came, didn't have to sneak in. There's no one on the fucking door. But yeah, I must have... I think I actually made like a fucking iPhone notes page of like who I must follow up with, because I met so many interesting people. And
that's important to do, as we've said. Like when you're that drunk, you should write it down, or you should try and make a note. Because
otherwise you'll forget. There was some guy I met on the roof of fucking on the Strand who was in Amsterdam, and he was particularly interested in mushrooms. And I wrote a note down because I knew I'd forget otherwise, to follow up with him.
Totally.
And I may never fucking speak to him again. But, you know, I think, and ironically as well, there's a lot of this shit on Twitter and like the whole money Twitter sphere, which I've got more into in the past few months. And it's like, there's a lot of people that think you should like never drink and be fucking teetotal and shit, but there is a lot of benefit, if played correctly, in knowing when to have a drink with the right people and the potential doors that opens, because just everyone loosens up a bit. Because if I'd not had a beer with that original guy at 6 p.m, which I was a bit like, oh fuck, I don't want to drink tonight, but then if I'd just gone home,
of course,
I wouldn't have got to know him as well as I did, which was a decent amount, and everyone else that he introduced me to.
No, absolutely.
So it's knowing how to read, like, you know, the pros and cons of a social situation. That doesn't mean fucking go to the pub every night and just hang around with people that aren't doing certain shit. But do you know what I mean? It's a balance.
Yeah, for sure.
Particularly in a big city like London, which is, again, comes back to the point that I've said to a lot of people. I think if you can, and most people can, if they're willing to like live a certain way, you should move to a big city. If you're serious about, you know, trying to do something, because I just think the benefits of potential meeting people massively outweigh like the short-term cost or whatever. Like rent's really high, blah blah blah, but just fucking, I don't know.
We're so lucky to have London.
Live in a share a house with someone.
Yeah, we're so lucky to have London. It's one of the greatest cities of the world. Definitely one of the great cities of the world. You know, it's safe, definitely. It's secure, it's civilized, it's multicultural, it's so interesting. There's so much going on. All the big business players are here. You know, all the big, you know, there's nothing that you want in London, maybe apart from sunshine. I mean, it is
but that's unproductive to an extent. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I always say to people, I actually get quite a few DMs on this saying, I live at home with my parents in X place in the Midlands, whatever. Should I move to London? I'm like, well, if you can afford to, which you can if you get a job anywhere, basically, then you should, yeah.
Well, as long as you're an hour from the city, you're fine, aren't you? I mean, you can always afford to live an hour from the city.
Yeah, so I just think it's super important to have access to the right people and then do with it what you will, I suppose. One thing I want to come on to, before we potentially wrap up soon, we're still like a fucking hour and 40 already, to be fair, it's just investing and all that side of thing.
Yeah.
Because I feel like my generation thinks of it, the only thing I think of investing wise is, I should fucking I wish I got into Bitcoin in 2013, or I'm going to sell a business and then invest. And interested to get your take on it, because I know you've got a finger in a few pies.
Yeah, no, so as well as Morphe's, I've got 4 other investments that I'm actively involved with. One of them's a big fund called Red Rice. I've given them some money. They're investing in all sorts of things.
They're Castor investors, aren't they?
Castor is the big one, the big sports brand. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm involved a lot more with the other 3. I'd say 2 are going well and 1's going less well. But the 2 exciting ones are Sherpa, which obviously you're involved with as well, which is the online education business, literally an online tuition business, and also Imagine Health, which is a mental wellness business, literally psychotherapy for people. So, you know, 2 sectors which are booming. With Imagine Health, we've got Google as our main client, so it's a really nice business already. I didn't know that. Dropbox as well. We're talking to all sorts of other blue chips, and you know, we're looking to really ramp that business up. We're looking to do a digital offering, which means you can, you know, literally talk to a therapist online, you know, through an app, which I think is very current. A lot of people need it.
I was actually on one last night. There's one called Mind Labs that raised a load of money.
Yeah, there's Mind Labs.
I messaged the founder.
BetterHelp.
He replied to me.
Yeah. So we the education business is interesting, but yeah, no. So my main job in those businesses is actually just doing the funding. They're both quite cash hungry. We're growing them. We're trying to raise money, or we have been raising money. So yeah, I've probably raised about £1 million this year for the education business, which has been quite, interesting. We've got maybe 15 shareholders now. It's exciting. It's I find it a lot more interesting than just being the broker, because I'm the owner, and I'm excited about both those sectors. I think the world's our oyster in both. I think mental health and online education, that they're two really good places to be.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so it's completely different to the middleman brokering thing, but a lot of the skills are the same. Raising money, What's interesting for me is there are opportunities potentially to work more closely in different ways with those companies, and that might be my next career. It might be, managing one of those businesses rather than just being the investment director, which is kind of where I am at the moment. But it'd be amazing to be the chief exec of one of those things and grow it properly. The experience is incredible, especially when you've started it from day dot. Literally, you form the company and you've done all that. The track record, if you get one of those to be successful, is going to be a great story, isn't it?
Yeah, well, mental health, I guess, mental wellness is the space my new brand is in.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Fucking any potential angels watching, please message me. Email is in the bio. Okay, few final questions before we wrap up then. So you kind of touched on it already. I was going to say, like, future plans going forward. Where do you see yourself going? Obviously still fucking very young relatively, in the grand scheme of things. Where would you like to be going next?
I'll carry on growing Morphos to the point where, I hope we're doing 10 deals a year, got a decent team. It's a cash cow business, but interesting. But ultimately, I think my real passion lies with these startups, trying to develop a number of those. I was saying to someone last night that maybe I'd like 10 of those, but actually the advice I've been given is just focus on a couple. Don't overspread yourself, because literally, how many hours have you got in a week? You want to have a social life.
Less than you think.
You want to play sport. You want to see your friends. You want to have a girlfriend. You can't spread yourself so thin that they all start slipping through the cracks. So I think I've picked those two. I've maybe got capacity for one or two more, and then I'll probably see how they go. And hopefully in my mid 40s, I'll exit one or two of them, and life might be good, right?
Yeah,
well, life's
exactly.
good already, but life might be, different.
That's your phrase, I've noticed. Okay, final cliche question before we wrap up then. If you could give advice to yourself at age 18, what would it be? I guess in a life and business sense.
Yeah, so I wish I hadn't gone to uni. I wish I'd gone and got a proper job, because uni was a complete waste of time for me. I think if you go to a really good red brick university and get a top degree, it's fine. But to go to some basic uni and get a kind of crappy degree, I feel like that was a complete waste of my time. And I know you agree with that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing was, on a personal front, I got married far too young. It didn't work out, and that affects your business life big time. When your personal life isn't going well, it really takes you off the ball. And I think that set me back several years in business terms. It really distracted me as it does. So, not going to uni, not getting married, I think were the main bits of advice I'd give myself. And also, I think the third one, which is really important, and we've touched on it a lot today, is don't try and put too much pressure on yourself to be too successful too young, because most people aren't. Most people don't make any money until they're 50 or 60. This idea that we're all going to be multimillionaires in our 20s or even in our 30s is very rare. It's very uncommon, it's unrealistic. And be happy, don't be rich, It's kind of...
Try and be both.
Try and be both, but, don't imagine that just because you've got a few million in the bank that you're suddenly 10 times happier. In my experience, it brings a lot of complications as well. And, you know, you should, that should be your life. Prioritize being happy over anything. Don't just wish for money.
Yeah, good advice. No, yeah, we'll wrap it up there. I think been about nearly 2 hours actually. Jesus Christ. Hopefully that was, I think, a very a solid insight from more experience than most of our guests, I suppose, and not just specifically econ. I think we covered a lot, like deal making, relationships, networking, just life, I suppose, as well. There's probably 20 other things we could have gone into actually, which always happens, but nearly at 2 hours, so I don't want to fucking drain the viewers' energy. But I hope you enjoyed that one. If you're enjoying the pod, by the way, subscribe to the fucking pod down below. Let people know to also watch it. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts as well. And trying to do an episode a week, as I've said from the start, which right now by episode 15 we are keeping up with. An episode a week will be for at least a year, which will be fucking difficult, but I'm working on it. I'm going to have to hire someone to start outreaching to fucking other people soon. I'm rinsing my entire network at the minute. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the episode. In summary, if you did, subscribe and let people know, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers for watching. Bye.